pushed his cleaning cart down the sterile corridors of Nexus Station, the massive orbital facility that served as humanity's first diplomatic outpost in the Galactic Federation. The wheels squeaked softly against the polished metal floors, a sound that had become his constant companion during the long night shifts. Most of the station's inhabitants were either asleep or busy with their important diplomatic work, leaving alone with his thoughts and his duties. At 52 years old, had worked as a custodial engineer on the station for 3 years now. He wasn't a diplomat, scientist, or military officer like the others who called Nexus Station home. He was just a janitor, invisible to most, noticed only when something wasn't clean enough, but didn't mind. He took pride in his work, ensuring every surface gleamed and every corner was spotless. In his own quiet way, he helped keep humanity's first foothold in galactic society running smoothly. The station housed representatives from dozens of alien species, each with their own customs, biology, and environmental needs. The diplomatic quarters were divided into sections based on atmospheric requirements, gravity preferences, and temperature zones. Had learned to navigate them all, adjusting his cleaning protocols for each species' specific needs. Tonight felt different, though. A new delegation had arrived earlier that day from the Empire, a species that humanity had been trying to establish trade relations with for months. They were formidable predators from a cold, harsh world where survival meant strength and cunning. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur that helped them survive in their planet's frigid climate. Their yellow eyes could see in near-total darkness, and their retractable claws marked them as apex predators. Most humans found the intimidating. Their deep, rumbling voices and sharp-toothed grins made even seasoned diplomats nervous, but had learned not to judge alien species by their appearance. He'd seen gentle giants and dangerous-looking creatures with hearts of gold. Still, he made sure to stay out of their way when possible. As cleaned the observation deck overlooking the station's central hub, he heard a sound that made him pause. It was soft, almost inaudible over the hum of the station's life support systems. A whimpering sound, like a small animal in distress. He stopped his work and listened carefully, trying to locate the source. The sound came from one of the maintenance alcoves near the environmental controls. Approached cautiously, his cleaning supplies forgotten. As he rounded the corner, he found the source of the noise, and his heart immediately went out to what he saw. Huddled in the corner of the alcove was a small cub, no bigger than a human child of 6 or 7 years old. The little creature was shivering violently, its thick fur doing little to protect it from what seemed to be intense cold. Its breath came out in small puffs of vapor, and its yellow eyes were wide with fear and discomfort. Had heard that cubs sometimes had difficulty regulating their body temperature in environments that weren't specifically calibrated for their needs. The station's environmental systems tried to accommodate all species, but sometimes the compromises meant that no one was perfectly comfortable. The cub looked up with those enormous yellow eyes, and he saw something that transcended species boundaries. Fear, cold, and the universal need for comfort. The little was lost, frightened, and freezing. Without hesitation, began removing his maintenance jacket. It was thick and insulated, designed to keep human workers warm in the cooler sections of the station. He'd worn it for years, and it had become like a second skin to him. The jacket was large enough to potentially help the small cub, and didn't hesitate to offer it. "Hey there, little one," said softly, crouching down to the cub's level. He kept his voice gentle and non-threatening, the same tone he'd used with his own children when they were young and scared. "You look cold. Would this help?" The cub tilted its head, clearly not understanding words but recognizing the kind tone. Slowly extended the jacket, making sure his movements were deliberate and non-threatening. The cub sniffed cautiously at the offered garment, then looked back with what seemed like confusion. Smiled and mimed wrapping the jacket around himself, then gestured to the cub. Understanding dawned in those yellow eyes, and the little cautiously reached out with one small, clawed hand to touch the jacket. The material was warm from body heat, and the cub's eyes widened with surprise and relief. Gently helped wrap the jacket around the small. It was large enough to envelope the cub completely, leaving only its head visible. Almost immediately, the shivering began to subside, and the little creature let out what sounded like a contented purr. "There you go," whispered, settling back on his heels. "Much better, right?" The cub looked up at him with what could only interpret as gratitude. It snuggled deeper into the warm jacket, and for the first time since had found it, the little seemed relaxed and comfortable. Knew he should probably alert station security or try to find the cub's parents, but something about the situation made him hesitate. The little one was finally warm and calm, and moving it might cause more distress. Instead, he decided to stay nearby while he continued his cleaning, keeping an eye on the cub to make sure it remained safe. As he worked in the surrounding area, found himself glancing frequently at the alcove. The cub had curled up in his jacket like it was a nest, breathing steadily and peacefully. Every so often, those yellow eyes would peek out and watch work, but there was no fear there anymore, only curiosity. The night shift passed slowly, and found himself talking softly to the cub as he worked. He told it about his job, about Earth, about his own children who were grown and living their own lives now. The cub seemed to listen, its ears perking up at the sound of his voice, though it remained safely bundled in the warm jacket. When shift was nearly over, he heard the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor. Deep voices speaking in the growling language of the echoed off the station walls, getting closer. The cub's ears flattened against its head, and it burrowed deeper into the jacket. 3 adults appeared around the corner, moving with the swift, purposeful gait of worried parents. They were enormous compared to the small cub, their dark fur standing on end with anxiety. Their yellow eyes swept the area frantically until they spotted the alcove where the cub was hidden. The lead, who assumed was one of the cub's parents, let out a rumbling call. The cub's head popped up from the jacket, and it replied with a high-pitched chirping sound. Relief flooded the adult's features as they approached the alcove. Stepped back respectfully, not wanting to interfere with the family reunion. But as the adult reached for the cub, the little one clung to his jacket, clearly reluctant to give up its source of warmth. The lead looked at with eyes that held a mixture of gratitude and confusion. This human had helped their cub, provided warmth and comfort when it was needed most. In culture, such kindness toward a vulnerable young one was a significant gesture, especially from a member of a different species. Gestured to the jacket and then to the cub, indicating that the little one could keep it for now. He mimed removing his own jacket and offering it, trying to communicate that the cub's warmth and comfort were more important than his own clothing. The adult exchanged glances, clearly moved by this unexpected kindness. One of them approached and spoke in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Human, why help small one, not your pack?" Smiled and shrugged. "It was cold. No one should be cold when there's something I can do to help." The simplicity of his answer seemed to surprise They were a species that valued strength and survival, where helping those outside your immediate pack was unusual. Yet here was this small, unremarkable human who had given up his own warmth for a child that wasn't even his own species. The lead carefully lifted the cub, making sure the jacket remained wrapped around the small form. The little one chirped contentedly, still warm and comfortable in skift. As they prepared to leave, the adult turned back to. "Human has honor," they said formally. "Pack remembers kindness to small one." Nodded respectfully. "I hope your little one stays warm. The jacket is yours to keep." As the family disappeared down the corridor, finished his shift with a light heart. He'd lost his favorite jacket, but he'd gained something more valuable. The memory of those grateful yellow eyes and the knowledge that he'd helped a frightened child would warm him far more than any piece of clothing. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to change everything, not just for him, but for the relationship between humanity and the Empire. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest ripples, and had just thrown a stone into a very large pond. The next morning would bring surprises that the humble janitor could never have imagined. Word travels fast in close-knit communities, whether they're human neighborhoods or alien diplomatic compounds. And in the delegation, the story of the human who gave his covering to a freezing cub was about to become something much more significant than could have dreamed. As he headed home to his small quarters, didn't notice the small group of cubs who had gathered near the entrance to the diplomatic wing. They had heard the story from there, told in the excited chirps and growls of youth. A human had shown kindness without expecting anything in return, had given up his own warmth for one of their own. In culture, such acts were rare even among their own species. To have an alien, a member of a species they barely knew, show such selfless care toward a cub was almost unheard of. The cubs chattered among themselves, trying to understand this strange human behavior. They decided they wanted to meet this human themselves to see if the story was true. And so, as slept peacefully in his quarters, unaware of the stir his simple kindness had created, the cubs began to plan. They would find this janitor, this cleaner of spaces who cleaned hearts as well. They would discover if humans truly possessed the kind of honor there had described. And perhaps, in their own way, they would show their appreciation for one who had cared for the smallest and most vulnerable among them. The station's computer systems recorded the unusual movement patterns in the diplomatic quarters that night, but no alarms were triggered. After all, what harm could a few curious cubs possibly cause? The answer to that question would become clear soon enough, as the ripples from kindness spread throughout the station and beyond. Tomorrow would bring a sight that no one on Nexus Station would ever forget, and would discover that sometimes the most powerful diplomatic breakthroughs come not from treaties and negotiations, but from the simple decision to help someone in need. Woke to the gentle chime of his alarm, signaling the start of another day on Nexus Station. He stretched and yawned, feeling slightly chilly in his quarters without his familiar jacket. The memory of the previous night brought a smile to his face as he remembered the grateful eyes of the small cub. He hoped the little one had stayed warm and was safely back with its family. After his usual morning routine, gathered his cleaning supplies and headed toward the residential section of the station. His first task was always to clean the corridors outside the diplomatic quarters, ensuring that the representatives from various species woke to spotless surroundings. As he rounded the corner near the delegation's wing, stopped dead in his tracks. The sight before him was so unexpected that he had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't still dreaming. Arranged in a neat line along the wall outside his supply closet were 7 cubs, all fast asleep. They ranged in size from very small, probably barely old enough to walk, to adolescents who were already showing the impressive build they would have as adults. Each cub was curled up in a tight ball, their dark fur fluffed up for warmth. Most remarkably, they were all sleeping directly in front of the door to his maintenance area. Stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He'd never seen anything like this before. The cubs looked peaceful and content, breathing steadily in their sleep. Occasionally, one would shift position or let out a small chirp, but they remained deeply asleep. As tried to process this strange scene, other early risers began to appear in the corridors. A human diplomat from the trade delegation stopped mid-step when she saw the sleeping cubs, her mouth falling open in surprise. A researcher paused to stare, his antenna twitching with confusion. Word began to spread quickly through the station's early morning community. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, everyone whispering and pointing at the unusual sight. No one wanted to wake the cubs, but everyone was curious about what had prompted this behavior. "What are they doing?" whispered Dr. Sarah Martinez, the station's head of studies. She'd spent years studying alien behavior, but this was unlike anything she'd encountered. "I have no idea," replied quietly. "They weren't here when my shift ended last night." The crowd continued to grow and soon included several adults from the delegation. Expected them to immediately collect their cubs and apologize for the disruption, but instead, they stood back and observed with expressions that seemed almost proud. Ambassador, the delegation's leader and the largest had ever seen, approached the scene. His yellow eyes swept over the sleeping cubs, then fixed on with an intensity that made the janitor slightly nervous. "Human," the ambassador said in his deep, rumbling voice. "Cubs choose sleeping place with great care. This choice brings much honor." Looked confused. "I don't understand, sir. Why are they sleeping here?" Ambassador gestured to the cubs with something approaching reverence. "Yesterday, you showed kindness to lost cub. You gave warmth when small ones suffered cold. Cubs hear story, decide human has true pack honor." Pack honor asked. "In our culture," the ambassador explained, "cubs sleep near those they trust most. Those who protect pack, who show strength and wisdom. Cubs choose you, human. They believe you are worthy of their trust." The implications of this began to dawn on, and he felt overwhelmed. "But I'm just a janitor. I just helped because the little one was cold." "Exactly," Ambassador rumbled approvingly. "You helped without thought of reward, without consideration of status or species. In culture, this is highest form of honor. Cubs recognize this truth." Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her scientific mind racing with the implications. "Ambassador, are you saying that in society, this represents a form of adoption or acceptance?" "More than acceptance," the ambassador replied. Cubs choose their guardians based on instinct and trust. They see into hearts of others, know who truly protects young. Human has been chosen as worthy pack member. Felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with temperature. These little ones, who barely knew him, had decided he was worthy of their trust. It was both humbling and deeply moving. As if sensing the conversation about them, one of the smaller cubs began to stir. Its yellow eyes opened slowly, blinking in the corridor's lights. When it saw standing nearby, the cub let out a happy chirp and struggled to its feet, approaching him without any sign of fear. The sight of this tiny predator, barely knee-high to, nuzzling against his leg with complete trust, brought tears to many of the human observers' eyes. The cub looked up with obvious affection, then settled back down at his feet, ready to continue its nap. "I don't know what to do," admitted to the ambassador. "I don't want to disappoint them, but I have work to do." Ambassador considered this carefully. Cubs are practical, they understand work, but they also understand loyalty. If Human continues his duties, Cubs will follow. They have chosen to be part of his pack now. And so began one of the most unusual days in Nexus Station's history. As went about his cleaning duties, he was accompanied by a procession of cubs. They followed him everywhere, maintaining a respectful distance while he worked but never straying far from their chosen guardian. The sight of the human janitor being trailed by 7 alien predator cubs became the talk of the station. People began stopping their important diplomatic work to watch the unusual parade. Scientists took readings, diplomats whispered among themselves, and maintenance staff found excuses to work in areas where they might catch a glimpse of the extraordinary scene. Found the experience both wonderful and challenging. The cubs were well-behaved and didn't interfere with his work, but their presence attracted constant attention. He was used to being invisible, just another maintenance worker going about his duties. Now, he felt like he was on display. During his lunch break, sat in the station's central cafeteria with his unusual entourage arranged around his table. The cubs had been provided with their own meals by the delegation, but they seemed more interested in watching eat than consuming their own food. Captain, the station's military liaison, approached table with a bemused expression. "I've seen a lot of strange things in my career, but this takes the prize. How are you handling all this attention?" Looked down at the cubs surrounding him, their yellow eyes bright with contentment and trust. "Honestly, Captain, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. I just helped one little one who was cold, and now you've apparently been adopted into an alien family," finished with a chuckle. "The diplomatic corps is fascinated. Dr. Martinez thinks this could represent a major breakthrough in human relations." "How so?" asked, gently stroking the fur of the smallest cub who had climbed onto his lap during lunch. "Think about it," explained. "These aren't just any cubs. Some of them are the children and relatives of high-ranking officials. The fact that they've chosen to trust you, to consider you part of their pack, sends a powerful message about how they view humanity." Hadn't considered the political implications of his situation. He'd been focused on not disappointing the cubs who had placed their trust in him. But he was beginning to understand that this simple act of kindness had created ripples that extended far beyond one cold cub. As the day continued, learned more about his new responsibilities. The cubs followed him through his entire shift, occasionally playing among themselves but always keeping him in sight. When one of the older cubs wandered too far, the others would chirp in alarm until the wayward youngster returned to the group. During a break, Ambassador approached in the observation deck where he was cleaning windows while the cubs napped nearby. "Human," the ambassador said formally, "I must speak with you about important matter." "Of course, Ambassador, what can I do for you?" "Cub's choice has meaning beyond what you may understand," the ambassador explained. "In our culture, when cubs choose guardian outside their immediate pack, it creates bond of great significance. You are now considered extended family to these young ones." Felt the weight of this responsibility settling on his shoulders. "What does that mean for me? What am I expected to do?" "Continue being yourself," the ambassador replied simply. "Cubs chose you because of who you are, not because of what you might become. But know that their families now consider you friend and ally. This creates opportunities for great cooperation between our peoples." As the day shift ended and prepared to head home, he faced a new dilemma. The cubs had spent the entire day following him, and they showed no signs of wanting to return to their family's quarters. When began walking toward the residential area, all 7 cubs fell into formation behind him. "Wait," said, stopping in the corridor. "You can't all come home with me. You have your own families, your own beds." The cubs tilted their heads in unison, clearly not understanding why he would expect them to leave. The smallest one, barely larger than a house cat, chirped pitifully and nuzzled against S's leg. Ambassador appeared, having anticipated this situation. "Cubs have decided to make den near chosen guardian," he explained. "Is natural behavior when they form new pack bonds. They will not stray far from human now." "But where will they sleep? My quarters are tiny, and I don't think station regulations allow." "Solution has been arranged," the ambassador rumbled with what had learned to recognize as amusement. "Station commander has authorized temporary den space near humans' quarters. Cubs will be comfortable and close to chosen guardian." And so, as evening fell on Nexus Station, found himself with 7 furry roommates in an enlarged living space that had been hastily arranged by station administration. The cubs had brought their own bedding and toys, creating a cozy den that somehow managed to feel both alien and familiar. As prepared for sleep, the cubs arranged themselves throughout the room, always keeping him in sight. The smallest one had claimed a spot on a cushion next to his bed, while the others found comfortable positions around the room. Their presence was surprisingly comforting, and found himself looking forward to seeing their bright eyes first thing in the morning. The last thing saw before drifting off to sleep was the gentle glow of 7 pairs of yellow eyes watching over him with the same protective instinct they might show for their own pack members. He had given one small act of kindness, and in return had been given something he hadn't even known he was missing: a sense of family and belonging that transcended species barriers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and even more extraordinary developments, as news of the cubs' choice spread throughout the Galactic Federation. But tonight, slept peacefully, surrounded by the soft breathing of his adopted pack, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the most important connections are formed not through grand gestures, but through simple moments of compassion. 3 weeks had passed since the cubs first chose to sleep by door, and life on Nexus Station had taken on a rhythm that no one could have anticipated. His daily routine now included his 7-cub escort, who had become as much a part of the station's daily operations as the cleaning schedules and diplomatic meetings. The cubs had grown more confident and playful, but they never strayed from their chosen guardian. They had learned work patterns and would position themselves strategically throughout whatever area he was cleaning, always keeping him in sight while staying out of his way. Station personnel had grown accustomed to checking for cubs before entering any area where might be working. What started as a local curiosity had begun to attract attention throughout the Galactic Federation. News of the human janitor who had been adopted by cubs had spread through diplomatic channels, scientific journals, and even entertainment networks. Nexus Station found itself hosting an increasing number of visitors who claimed to have business there, but were really hopping to witness this unprecedented bonding. Dr. Martinez had documented every aspect of the cubs' behavior, creating the most comprehensive study of social bonding ever recorded. Her findings were revolutionary, showing levels of cross-species trust and acceptance that challenged many existing theories about predator species and territorial behavior. "The implications go far beyond simple friendship," she explained to a gathering from across the galaxy who had come to observe, and his cubs. "These cubs are demonstrating that bonding behaviors are based on character assessment rather than species identification. They're choosing pack membership based on actions and trustworthiness, not genetics." Meanwhile had become something of a reluctant celebrity. Diplomatic officials who had never noticed him before were suddenly requesting meetings. Scientists wanted to interview him. Cultural from various species came to observe how he interacted with the cubs. Through it all, remained focused on his work and his responsibility to the 7 young who had placed their trust in him. The cubs themselves had become ambassadors of a sort. Their obvious contentment and health and care served as a living testament to human trustworthiness. Other species representatives began approaching human diplomats with new interest, curious about a race that could inspire such loyalty from famously discriminating predator cubs. On this particular morning, was going about his usual routine in the station's diplomatic wing when his communicator chimed with an urgent message from station commander. "Report to the main conference room immediately. Bring your entourage." looked down at the cubs, who sensed the change in his demeanor and moved closer to him protectively. The largest of the cubs, an adolescent named who had appointed himself as pack leader, let out a low, questioning rumble. "I don't know what this is about either," told them softly, "but we'll face it together." The conference room was packed when arrived with his 7-cub escort. He recognized most of the human delegation, but there were also several officials he'd never seen before, including what appeared to be a very high-ranking elder whose ornate ceremonial sash indicated important status. Representatives from a dozen other species filled the remaining seats, all watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to amazement. Commander gestured for to take a seat at the main conference table. The cubs arranged themselves around his chair in their typical protective formation, with positioning himself between and the door. Commander began, "I'd like you to meet High Pack Leader of the Imperial Council." The elderly stood with impressive dignity despite his advanced age. His fur was silver with age, but his yellow eyes were as sharp as any had seen. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. "Human," High Pack Leader rumbled formally, "I have traveled far to meet the one who has shown such honor to our cubs. The council has heard of your actions and their consequences. We would hear your words on these matters." Felt suddenly overwhelmed. This was clearly a moment of enormous importance, but he had no idea what was expected of him. He looked down at the cubs surrounding him, drew strength from their presence, and spoke from his heart. "High Pack Leader, I'm honored by your visit, but I'm not sure what you want me to say. I helped a cold cub because that's what anyone should do. I've cared for these young ones because they chose to trust me, and I couldn't betray that trust. I haven't done anything extraordinary." The old's eyes widened slightly, and he exchanged glances with Ambassador. "Human speaks with wisdom of true pack leader," he said approvingly. "Actions speak without need for grand words." High Pack Leader walked slowly around the conference table, his gaze taking in the cubs who watched him respectfully but remained close to. "Cubs choose their guardians with ancient wisdom," he continued. "They see truth that adults sometimes miss. These young ones have chosen human as worthy of pack bond. This choice cannot be ignored or dismissed." The High Pack Leader stopped in front of and spoke in a formal tone that carried throughout the room. "The Imperial Council recognizes human as pack friend, with all honors and privileges such status brings. Furthermore, the Council declares that the Cubs' choice represents a new understanding between and human peoples." Commander leaned forward. "High Pack Leader, what exactly does this mean for relations between our species?" "It means," the elderly replied, "that Empire wishes to establish formal alliance with Human Federation. If humans can produce individuals worthy of Cubs' trust, then humans are worthy of friendship. We propose full military and trade alliance, with humans serving as special cultural ambassador between our peoples." The room erupted in excited murmurs. A full alliance with the Empire would be enormously beneficial for humanity. The controlled several key trade routes and possessed advanced military technology. More importantly, their reputation as fierce but honorable warriors would lend credibility to humanity's growing presence in galactic politics. Felt dizzy. "I'm sorry, did you just say I would be an ambassador? I'm a janitor, not a diplomat." High Pack Leader's expression was kind but firm. "Human, you have already proven yourself finest diplomat possible. You have won trust of our young without words or negotiations, only through actions of character. Cubs judge more truly than any council or assembly." Dr. Martinez spoke up from her position at the table. "High Pack Leader, this unprecedented bonding has scientific implications as well. Would the Empire be willing to collaborate on research to better understand cross-species social bonding?" "We would welcome such collaboration," the High Pack Leader replied. "Understanding between peoples benefits all. Human and Cubs prove this truth." As the discussion continued around him, felt one of the smaller cubs, a female named, climb onto his lap. She settled there with the confidence of long practice, purring contentedly while the adults talked about trade agreements and military alliances. High Pack Leader said, interrupting the flow of diplomatic discussion, "What happens to the cubs? I've grown attached to them and they seem to have bonded with me. Will they need to return to space?" The old leader's eyes softened with what was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Cubs have chosen their pack. Pack bonds are not broken by distance or duty. Cubs will remain with human as long as bond exists. They are now his responsibility and his family. The implications hit like a physical blow. These 7 young weren't just temporary companions. They were his family now, according to their culture's most sacred traditions. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but as he looked down at sleeping trustingly in his lap and felt the protective presence of the other cubs around him, knew he wouldn't want it any other way. Ambassador stood and addressed the assembly. This alliance will bring great benefits to both peoples, but more important than trade or military cooperation is the lesson these cubs teach us. They show that trust and friendship can bridge any divide when they are based on genuine character and kindness. Over the following weeks, Nexus Station became the center of the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in human history. The formal alliance with the Empire opened doors to relationships with other species who had been watching humanity's progress with interest. The Cubs' choice had become a symbol of humanity's potential for genuine partnership with alien civilizations. Found his new role as special cultural ambassador both challenging and rewarding. He discovered that his years of quietly observing different species while going about his cleaning duties had given him insights that formally trained diplomats often missed. His genuine care for others, demonstrated first with one cold cub and extended to all he met, proved to be his greatest diplomatic asset. The cubs, now permanent residents of Nexus Station, thrived in their new environment. They had access to both human and education, learning from both cultures while maintaining their unique perspective as the bridge between them. Their presence served as a constant reminder that the most important connections between peoples are built on trust, kindness, and mutual respect. Kept his original quarters on the station, though they had been expanded to accommodate his unusual family. Every morning, he would wake to find 7 pairs of yellow eyes watching him with the same trust and affection they had shown from that first day. The cubs had grown, but their bond with their chosen guardian had only strengthened. Years later, historians would mark the day gave his jacket to a cold cub as the beginning of a new era in galactic relations. The Terran Alliance became a model for other partnerships, proving that lasting peace could be built on simple foundations of decency and care. But for the true measure of success wasn't in the trade agreements or military partnerships that grew from that moment. It was in the purring sounds that filled his quarters each evening, the playful chirps that greeted him each morning, and the absolute trust in the eyes of 7 young beings who had chosen him as worthy of their love. Sometimes the greatest changes in the universe begin with the smallest acts of kindness. A maintenance jacket offered to a cold child had become the foundation for peace between species, proving that true diplomacy isn't about grand gestures or formal negotiations. It's about recognizing that, regardless of what planet we come from or what we look like, we all need the same basic things: warmth, safety, and someone who cares enough to help when we're in need. Had learned that lesson in the corridors of Nexus Station, and in teaching it to others, he had helped create a better galaxy for all who inhabited it. The cubs who slept peacefully around his quarters each night were living proof that the universe was full of possibilities when beings chose to trust each other, one small act of kindness at a time.